here to preach. Clay and his family are on fall break, like a lot of our other families are enjoying right now. So I'm back again. Do you remember last summer when Clay was doing a series on the powerful words of Paul, and he came to a rather challenging passage and decided it was my turn to preach? So now we're in a series on the 10 Commandments, and we get to the 7th commandment about adultery. My turn to preach. Many years ago, when I was working with 4th, 5th, and 6th grade children in the church, we were doing a study of the 10 Commandments. And wanting to make the study interesting and creative for them, I gave them a whole stack of magazines and a bunch of sheets of poster paper, and I said, now, I want you to cut out pictures and do collages of the 10 Commandments. Everything went well until we got to this 7th commandment about adultery, and you can imagine some of the pictures that they put together. And I realized then that children know a lot more today than we ever knew when we were little. And so we continue this series on the commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. When you hear that, I wonder what comes to your mind. What thoughts do you have? Maybe for some, what memories or lingering guilt feelings? What pain, maybe, if you're the one who has been hurt by an unfaithful spouse? Do questions come to mind like, where do you draw the line between what is and what isn't adultery? Because after all, didn't Jesus say that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart? How many lives have I seen over the years left in ruin because of the sin of adultery? How many times do ministers share the pain of that tragedy? One such situation involved a young, outstanding man who was at the very peak of his life and his career. He had everything going for him: prominence, success, affluence, great popularity, admiration. He was married and the father of several children. But one day this man was smitten by the beauty of a woman who was not his wife. He couldn't get her out of his mind because of her great beauty. He finds out who she is. He discovers that she is married, yet still he pursues her until she has an affair with him. They commit adultery. As a result of that affair, the woman gets pregnant. The man tries to pass it off as her husband's child, but for certain reasons that doesn't work. Then in desperation, as one evil always leads to another, he has the husband killed, not directly killing him, but making it look like an accident. Now he is not only guilty of adultery, but also murder. The man talks to his minister about it. The minister makes it very clear that this is greatly displeasing to God. Not too long thereafter, a baby is born, the child conceived in the adulterous affair. The baby is born very weak and dies within 7 days. Now, you can read that tragic story yourself in the Bible, in the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel, chapters 11 and 12. The man was King David, one of the greatest leaders in the Bible. Still, he messed up. He broke one of the 10 Commandments, and this time it ruined his life. It was never the same again. Nothing destroys a family any faster than the sin of adultery. It always leaves permanent scars on people's lives, tarnishing memories and relationships. You know, adultery is not just a private affair between two consenting adults, but it's an assault on the larger community itself, and so it must be dealt with for the community's sake. Every marriage ceremony that we perform in the Christian church In it we say that marriage was established by God for the welfare and the happiness of humankind, of the whole society, not just for the legalized pleasure of the two people getting married. It's been said by many throughout history that when marriage and family life fall apart, so will society itself. And since adultery is such a great threat to marriage, it's not just a threat to the two people involved, but also a threat to the larger social order itself. It's not just a sin between two people, but a sin against the whole society, not to mention a sin against God, to whom the vows were made. Now, people don't just fall into immorality. I don't think anybody gets up one day and says, I think I'll go out and commit adultery today. You're not a moral, upright person one day and then fall into sin the next. But every minister, every counselor, every adulterer knows that there are certain steps that lead to adultery. Usually it begins with unhappiness in a relationship. No marriage is perfect. Every marriage has its difficult times. But it's in those moments of difficulty when the one or both of the parties involved are less than satisfied that you are so much more vulnerable to the temptation that leads to adultery. Then there are the sinful thoughts that slip into your mind. Maybe I made a mistake in my marriage. Maybe I married the wrong person. I wonder what it would be like to be married to so-and-so. The battle with temptation begins in your mind. And what you think about, if you dwell on it long enough, you will eventually feel. And what you feel, you will certainly be tempted to act upon. As the scriptures tell us in James' letter, temptation is the pull of a person's own evil thoughts and wishes. These evil thoughts lead to evil actions, and afterwards to death, or at least disaster. Then there's the playful flirting, lingering looks, prolonged stares, comments that test the waters, maybe even a wink now and then. This can lead to the next dangerous step, which is emotional involvement. You start spending a little time with somebody of the opposite sex that you find attractive, hanging around the office after work, maybe a so-called innocent lunch date, phone calls, text messages. The biggest mistake that leads to emotional involvement is when you talk to somebody of the opposite sex about problems in your marriage and that you are unhappy. When you do that, what you're looking for is understanding, sympathy, support, and other deep emotional needs that you don't feel like you're getting at home. When you choose this, believe me, you're choosing to walk into a minefield. As one woman who was very unhappy, unsatisfied, unfulfilled in her marriage said, there was a man in our church. She began to talk to him, to share her problems with him. She said, he was so kind, so tender, so sympathetic, so understanding of the pain that I felt. But he's never touched me, she said. If he ever does, I'm a goner. Putting yourself in that position can easily lead to the next step, which is physical involvement. Once you've crossed the line to where there's physical contact, the pull of sin and temptation becomes overwhelming, at least for a while. In time, it will lead to guilt, worry, fear, and you're on your way to the disaster. The final step on the road to adultery is rationalization, convincing yourself that what you're doing is okay. I'm amazed at some of the things people have told me over the years. I love my wife and children. I don't want a divorce, so it's better to have an affair for the sake of my family. I have needs that my spouse just can't fulfill. Just one more time, we really love each other. God understands. God will forgive. God loves us no matter what we do. All of those rationalizations. We become pros at deceiving ourselves. We become experts at pulling the wool over our own eyes. The scriptures again tell us the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. We can convince ourselves that everything is okay given the circumstances, yet God still says, you shall not commit adultery. So how is it that we can avoid adultery in our lives? How can we adultery-proof our marriages? Even if you've never thought about it, even if you think there's no way that it could ever happen to you, there are some important things I believe every married couple should do to make sure it stays that way. First of all, you should make a commitment to God. You're supposed to be doing that when you get married anyhow. But decide right now that you're going to live up to that commitment. You're going to live up to God's standards. Real Christian marriage is not just a relationship between two people, but it's a relationship between two people and God. And God has given us very clear instructions about what is right and what is wrong in marriage, what is acceptable, what is healthy, and what is not. Secondly, make a commitment to your spouse. Make a commitment that says, I'm going to fulfill my spouse's needs better than anyone else could ever do. Really, if a marriage is based on agape love, and that's what a lasting marriage is based on, agape love means putting the other person first. It means you're going to do everything you can to take care of the needs of the other person first. And if both are doing it, I say in the perfect marriage, everybody's taken care of, but not out of selfishness, but out of the fact that somebody else loves them. Again, in 1 Corinthians, we read, a man should fulfill his duty as a husband, a wife should fulfill her duty as a wife, and each should satisfy the other's needs. If you make that commitment and you live up to it, your spouse will never have to have his or her needs fulfilled by anybody else. The other all-important commitment that married couples make to each other is that of a lifelong marriage. We say, till death we do part. Then neither should ever think of being married to anybody else, and the whole term divorce should never enter your thoughts, something you don't want to do. As C.S. Lewis says in his great little book, Mere Christianity, the important thing about lifelong commitment in Christian marriage is that when two people fall out of love, that usually will happen at some time during a long marriage, they will stay together until they fall back into love again. And their renewed love will be much richer and deeper than even their original love. Thirdly, if you want to adultery-proof your marriage, avoid tempting thoughts. Again, in the scriptures, turn your back on lustful desires and give your positive attention to goodness, integrity, love, and peace. When marriage is difficult, don't let those what-if thoughts linger in your mind. And to make sure they don't, you have to replace them with positive thoughts. It's never enough to say, I'm not going to think about something. But if you don't replace your thoughts with positive thoughts, the other ones are going to come back, like the scriptures say, and much worse than they were before. Nobody is perfect, including you. But there are some good things in the person you married, obviously, or you wouldn't have married that person to begin with. So if those negative thoughts start to come in, don't think about them, but start thinking about some positive things, what's good, loving, kind about your spouse. And you'll be amazed at the effect it'll have on your attitude, your feelings, and how it will improve your marriage. Number 4, don't get emotionally involved with somebody else. Don't put yourself in a position where that could happen. Certainly, don't ever make the mistake of talking to somebody of the opposite sex, especially someone you find attractive, about the problems you're having in your marriage or how unhappy you are. And if anybody talks to you that way, you better run, because that's a huge, huge minefield. Number 5, don't cross the line. Don't get physically involved with someone other than your spouse. Be especially aware of anybody of the opposite sex with whom you feel a sense of electricity. Don't enjoy that even for a second, but pull away from that person immediately. Remind yourself that you love your husband or wife, and you're not going to risk what you have just because somebody else makes you feel good or makes you feel wanted. Don't flirt, even if you think it's innocent fun. Avoid lingering thoughts. Avoid prolonged stares. Just remember, it's not worth the price. When Jesus says anyone who lusts after a woman has already committed adultery with her in her heart, some people like to say, rationalize again, well, then it's okay to go ahead. But that's not what that passage means. We're human. Everybody's going to have thoughts come into their mind when an attractive person goes by. But lusting means you stay with that thought and you keep thinking about it. And that's what leads to the danger. So again, replace those thoughts with some good thoughts about the person to whom you're married. As I've said over and over again, avoid temptation. Don't put yourself in situations where you can be tempted. That includes after-hour discussions at work or having dinner on a business trip with someone that you find attractive. It also means carefully choosing the friends that you spend the most time with. Most affairs occur between couples who know each other. They're already good friends. So make sure your best friends are as strongly committed to their marriage as you are to yours. And finally, the last, number 7, if you want to avoid the sin of adultery, whenever you're tempted, think of the consequences. Look at your children. Think of what it will do to them. Look at your spouse, your larger family, your friends, your church, the larger society, your relationship with Christ. As the Bible says, the one who commits adultery is an utter fool, for he or she destroys their own soul. Or again, in Proverbs, adultery will cost a person all that he or she has. So no matter what the reasons or rationalizations or excuses that you might come up with, it's not worth the price that you and others will pay. Thou shalt not commit